Okay,
no, I'm recording.
All right. Has graced our stage several times before, and she usually tells a very comedic story. She is a professional comedian, stand-up, works with seniors a lot. But here's one of the things you need to know about comedians. Sometimes comedy is used to by a performer to camouflage personal hurt, and it's tonight. Jeannie wants to share a story that was her secret for many years, a huge life recess. Jeannie Knox.
Hidden in the deep recesses of my soul is a story that's almost 50 years old. A story my mother refused to acknowledge, and one that I was forced to accept. It is a story of loss and a grief I never truly had. On September 19th, 1970, I saw my baby for the very first time through the window of the nursery. I looked at her sweet face and I knew I could never forget it, because just moments before a nurse told me it would be the last time I'd ever see her. You see, in 1970, there was no counsel for unwed mothers. I was told that I should do the right thing, and if I truly loved my baby, I would give her up so that she could have the opportunity to grow up with two parents. And the nurses told me, you will get on with your life and you'll forget all about it. When I told my mother I was pregnant, the first thing she said was, you need to get out of town so no one will find out. And then she warned me. She said, don't ever tell this story to anyone because they will think less of you, and no man will ever marry you. My mother found a home in Omaha, Nebraska that was run by the Salvation Army, and I was sent there. Omaha was chosen because we lived in New Jersey, and my mother felt that maybe that was far enough away so no one in my town would hear about it. The drive to Nebraska was a long one, and it was made even longer because my mother refused to talk about what she called my situation. When we pulled up in front of the home, I thought it looked so much like a prison. It was cold and foreboding. We were met at the door by a woman who took us to her office. She sat behind her desk, and my mother and I sat across. I cleared my throat in anticipation of answering questions, but the woman never looked at me and asked the questions of my mother. My mother answered as if I wasn't even in the room. It was a hard time, and I felt so lost and alone. Finally, the woman asked my mother, what about the father of the baby? And my mother answered, there's no reason to get him involved. He's from a good home, and I don't want his family to go through this disaster too. There was no talk of options. I was told this was the only thing I could do. And because of my actions, I was not fit to raise a child, and the baby would be better off without me. When the questions were finished, my mother got up, kissed me on the cheek, and left the home. I was taken to a room and told that I would share it with another girl. I remember there was 2 beds, a table between them, and a desk. That was all. There were no mirrors, no pictures on the wall. I remember thinking to myself, is this what a prison cell looks like? We all had jobs at the home, and mine was cleaning the toilets of the main bathroom we all shared. believe it or not, we were given cheap wedding bands to wear, and we were required to wear them when we left the home. And when we left, we had to travel in groups of 6 or more girls. I often wondered if that charade was very effective. I found out when I went out for the first time with a bunch of girls. As soon as we walked out at the door, there were a bunch of teenage boys standing there, and they called us sluts and whores. I was lucky to find out about a little-known project where I could leave the home and work for a private family for a while, and when I was ready to deliver, I'd go back to the home. In exchange for taking care of 3 young children, doing the cleaning, the cooking, running errands, and doing the ironing, I was given my very own room and bath. Still, I remember feeling so sad when I heard the mother of the children talking to her friends. She never referred to me by my name. Instead, I was referred to as her pregnant girl, as in, well, we'll send our pregnant girl over to take care of that. But I'll tell you, the night was the best for me, because at night, I could go to my room and lie on my bed, and I talked to my baby. And I remember the first time I felt her kick, and I told her I loved her, and I was so sorry I had to give her up, but I wanted her to have a good life with wonderful parents. It was so hard being alone. There was one good thing about the home. Because I worked so hard, the time went by so quickly. But I worked so hard, 2 weeks before I was due to deliver, I had to report back to the home and was put on bed rest. I was not prepared for labor or delivery, and when I went into labor, I couldn't believe the pain. No one had told me it would be so painful. I was moved on a gurney next to the delivery room, and the room was, or the hallway was dimly lit, and I felt so lost. And I was crying, and I finally saw a nurse come by, and I yelled, it hurts so bad. She came over, and she looked down at me, and she said, well, it serves you right, and walked away. I don't remember the delivery, but I do remember waking from the anesthesia and a woman placing a clipboard in front of me, relinquishment papers for me to sign. As you may imagine, I left that home a totally different person than the young girl that went in. My heart was hardened, and a part of me was missing. I always hoped that maybe someday my daughter would find me, but I knew it would never happen. And as much as I wanted to search for her, I didn't feel like I had the right, and I didn't want to disrupt her life. Many times I would call my mother and I'd like to talk to her about it, but she'd always change the subject. It was as if she didn't talk about it, it never happened. I never returned to New Jersey, but I never forgot. And years after I gave birth, every time I would see a baby or a young child, I would think, maybe it's mine. I wondered about her every day. I didn't know if she was alive or if she was happy. It was a hard time, but I knew I had to get through it. And then I received a letter from Nebraska Children's Home. I ripped it open, and it simply stated, we have a matter of great importance to discuss with you, and they gave a phone number. I made the call, and that call changed my life forever. A social worker told me my daughter, named Stacy, was looking for me and wanted to find me, and she asked if I wanted to be connected to her, and of course I said yes. Then the social worker shared a little bit of information. My daughter, now 24, was married, a college graduate and worked for the state of Nebraska in the adoption center. On my birthday, October 3rd, I received my first letter. It was 12 pages long, and there were 2 pictures of her. And she told me all about her family. And I remember what she said in the first line. She said, "Dear Jean, I've had a great life with wonderful parents, but I always wanted to find you just to say thank you for having me." We talked on the phone several times, and then we decided I would fly to Nebraska to see her. It was the most wonderful weekend of my life. We laughed, we cried, we shared so much. A couple of years later, I found out that she was pregnant with her first child, and I flew out to go to the baby shower. I remember when we came back, we went into her living room and she started going through all the gifts. But she especially loved the gift of baby books. And she told me why. She said it was a great memory when she was growing up that every night her parents would take turns reading stories to her. And I began to cry uncontrollably, and she asked what was wrong. And I told her, well, I've always had this dream that I could read a story to my child. And you know what she did? She picked up a book and brought it over to me. She said, "It's never too late. Why not read a story to me and my baby?" And I did, through lots of tears, I assure you. A couple of months later, on April 27th, Daniel Jacob was born, and I flew to meet him. Stacy came in the room holding DJ in her arms, and she asked me, "Would you like to hold him?" I reached out my arms, and she placed the baby in them, and I held him close. And I had the most wonderful experience. A warmth came over me, and it transported me back to that moment so many years ago when I stood in front of the window looking at my baby. But this time I got to hold him. When DJ was 4 years old, Stacy wanted to explain to him just exactly who I was. So she said, "DJ, remember when you were a baby and you grew in my tummy?" He said, "Uh-huh." She said, "Well, when I was a baby, I grew in Jean's tummy." His eyes got real big, and he looked across the table at me and said, "So, are you my sister?" 5 years later, Stacy and her husband adopted a little girl, 3 weeks old. Her name, Kirsten. I flew to meet her, and Stacy met me at the airport. As I got closer, I noticed that Stacy wasn't holding her, but there was a woman next to her who was. She introduced me, and Stacy, my daughter, said, "I'd like you to meet Kirsten's birth mother." And she handed the baby over to me, and we all cried. It was magical. The children, DJ and Kirsten, they don't call me Grandma because they have 2 sets of grandparents. They just call me Jean, but that's fine with me. I'm just happy to be in their lives. And when Kirsten was 6 or 7, we went shopping together. We were having a great time and laughing, and a woman came up to Kirsten and said, "Isn't it nice being with your grandmother?" Kirsten looked at me, and then she looked at the woman and said, "Oh, Jean's not my grandma. She's my mom's biological parent." I remember the first Mother's Day after Stacy found me and I received my first Mother's Day card. It was beautiful, and I framed it, but not because it had a lovely picture or a nice poem. It was what Stacy wrote on the bottom. She said, "Thank you. Thank you for giving me the greatest gift, the gift of life." That story I told you about, the one that was hidden in the deep recesses of my soul, it's no longer there. It has been released, restored, revived, and now it resides in my heart, where it truly belongs. Thank you.
I found Jean to be on our stage when she called me one night and said, I need to have a refund for the tickets I bought online to come to your show. I said, I'll give you the refund, but I also want you to think about being in the show. So we have landed a great storyteller. Thank you very much. The Tailspring Lounge has been